My phone says historic.
It's a full running.
Top of the page. Get a motion to approve the agenda?
I make the motion to approve the agenda last month.
Or this?
Last,
The agenda.
the
For the
agenda.
agenda
Oh, the
today.
agenda for today. I'm looking at the,
Yeah.
yeah.
I have a motion to approve the agenda. Is there a second?
I'll second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Consideration of minutes, January 15th, 2019. Has everybody that was here, which was everybody besides me, had a chance to review them, and are they correct? And so, let's take a motion to approve the minutes as written.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes as written.
A motion on the floor, is there a second?
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Public comment. We have no public, so action items. Need a motion to consider the recommendation for ordinance that will create zoning. Just a motion to consider it.
I'll
What,
make a motion to consider it.
aren't we supposed to?
Yeah. I'll
Are we
second the
supposed to
motion.
consider it, make a motion to consider it before we actually do it? We follow the rules?
Yes.
Okay.
I'll second the motion.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
James, Crystal, whoever's got the ball?
I'll run through it. So, taking the comments that you emailed to us, an hour before the meeting, I appreciate that.
I just wanted to walk through them and see if
Right.
all were considered.
Right, and that's kind of what I wanted to do, is kind of go section by section. So, looking at the purpose of it, of course, we haven't really had any other changes. Preservation, protection, enhancement of, I need to fix that first word. There's a typo there. It should be enhancement of those buildings, not what's on the slide. Property, structure, sites, incidental appurtenances for use for commercial purposes that generate gross receipts tax revenue for the city of Lovington in the area described as. And then you see the section. So looking at Main Street, it begins at Avenue R, ends at Love Street. It's bounded on the east by the western portion of Love Street and bounded on the west by the eastern portion of First Street. So one complication that I do kind of see with that is along Love Street and along First Street, particularly along Love Street, we do have residences there, so it may be beneficial, or if y'all desire, we could actually change that to the alleyway easement on both sides. That way we don't have individuals requesting any type of a zoning change, especially if they try to sell their property. Even they're going to have difficulty if it's zoned commercial right now, but there are areas that it is zoned for residential use. So maybe scaling that back to where it's the alley in between those. That way we're getting the Main Street block, that east and west quarters of those blocks. And then on Avenue D, basically do the same thing, use that alleyway. Right now it starts at 17th Street, goes all the way to Commercial and north and south sides of Avenue D. So I know you had a couple of things highlighted on your comments. You should have that copy in front of you. But we also put in there that even if they subdivide that property, you can't change that zoning. Of course, they can always come in and request a zoning change, but right here, this is the sole intent. So we don't want somebody to purchase a piece of commercial or Zone E real estate and they want to put a house there, right there in downtown Lovington.
Is that what B and C are addressing here?
B and C is identifying the, B identifies Avenue D, but C actually is what specifies you can't change that zone.
So what do we do with the properties that have already been changed into single-family residences?
In the event the property, well, there's nothing we can do. at this point until that property sells. Going through town, I counted the other day, there's less than a dozen properties that are being used or that are actually either a home or a mobile home.
And Georgia and all that,
Right, well, no, actually on Main Street, on the north end of Maine.
Oh,
Yes,
no,
so there's about a dozen of those properties, but, and that's one of the things is that even with some of these existing uses that are present, we'll get into those in a minute, that we have listed as a prohibited use until and please correct me if I'm wrong, but until that property transfers ownership, that use is still allowable. There, I guess you could say it's the grandfather clause in zoning, I guess you can say. Because they purchased that property, if they're living there, if they've got a single family dwelling, or even if it's a manufactured home, they bought that, they started using it before this ordinance takes effect, they can continue that use. However, if they sell it, that use cannot continue.
So what about the buildings that people already own that they're using for storage and stuff like that?
Same thing.
Same thing their grandfather did?
Correct.
Would that include even if they were to, say, hand it down from one family member to another?
Well, usually it's not a sale of the property, it's a change in ownership.
Uh-huh.
And so if Mrs. Smith owned the property and then she wanted to put it into an LLC that she also owned, that may trigger, because it's a different owner that has it. It's a different user that wouldn't have the same types of claims for, the grandfather clause. And I bought it in 1970. It was a residential structure. I lived there the whole time. But if you sell that to somebody else, if you give it to somebody else, and oftentimes the issue comes up with inheritance, but if there's a change in the ownership, that's usually when that kicks in. It doesn't have to be a change in the ownership accompanied by some kind of cash consideration. So.
So any type of change in the ownership.
Right.
Would
The
that
question then becomes is, if Mr. Smith owns it, and he wants to then sell it to himself and Mr. Jones, then what happens in that instance? And so most of the time you look at it and say, well, it's a new group of owners, even though that one owner is still from the initial position that would have the claim to be grandfathered in, it's a new set.
So, I'm just trying to look at it from the long-term thing. So you build a house in a commercial area that's going to be zoned economic, which you didn't know when you purchased it, and then you turn around and you find out that, well, let's say you bought one of those manufactured homes, but you set it, on a permanent foundation. You can't get wheels underneath it. It's as if it were a permanent home. Then that person wants to sell it. They can only sell it to someone who would want to turn it into, say, like a coffee shop or a dress shop or sewing, some kind of commercial use. That's what we're saying, right?
Listen, two-story and then the bottom can be a commercial and the top can be residential.
A top could be a residential. But if it was a manufactured home, if you're in the bottom, you're down there with the rats, So, but my thinking of it is that, and understand, I'm not opposed to this. I'm just trying to look at it from all angles. Do we have a right to cause a person, because maybe it becomes unsellable at that point, and then that's a huge loss in that regard, financially. And so I'm looking at it from that perspective at this moment. I mean, how do we justify that?
We had this debate when we went through the master plan, 4 or 5 years ago?
Dude, you wasn't here that long ago.
I know.
But I wasn't here.
Yes, I know. We had that debate, and this creates its own set of problems in the future. But for Lovington to grow and for Lovington to grow in an economic way that also assists with residential and stuff like that, if we don't do stuff like this, then
Mhm.
then we put ourselves, you know, in a continual non-growth mode.
Well, under your scenario, are you assuming that when they built that structure or moved it in, that it was zoned for residential, or that it's zoned commercial?
Now we're back to the not enforcing our code,
Yeah.
because we allowed this to happen. Now, in part, it's we bear some of the responsibility for not enforcing our own restrictions.
Well, I don't know if we could, if you could restrict somebody from a residential structure in a commercial area. So that
Or that's because we didn't have a variance at that time?
No, that's because our rules didn't require.
I'm sorry, I said the wrong one, but
Yeah.
we didn't have an ordinance at that time.
So our rules didn't necessarily prevent it. So I think you could make the argument, if the city was in that position, you could say, well, we didn't prevent you from doing it, but you bought a residential structure and it was zoned commercial, so you know that there are certain restrictions that come with that, like financing or issues, you know, those types of things. And so I don't know if it would be entirely be on the city's burden, so to speak, but you know, it's definitely an issue that's out there. But that same argument could be made to somebody that invested, you know, a certain part of their salary in a carport that doesn't comply, and you know, so there's you just get into a, you know, it's like Pandora's box of where do you?
Hey, I understand.
Yeah.
I'm there. I mean,
Yeah.
you know.
Somebody has to take
So I guess my only question then is, it comes down to the will of the city to enforce its own ordinances.
the commission.
The commission. But, you know, that's the question, so.
Right.
So, is it safe to assume that everybody that was affected by this receives a letter and a notification of today's meeting?
No, this is merely, we haven't even started the advertisement process yet. So we just basically, we've had discussions, of course.
This is to
We
go
started
to
this
the
with a
commission.
discussion with the city commission to get some direction. They gave us the direction. We brought it to you guys. We've had these meetings about the economic zone. I was thinking about that previously. So we haven't yet, because we haven't had any type of a draft ordinance to even really, or not a draft, something basically to present to the city commission. We did go through and provided them an update on what we've had so far. So there's been time for public comment. If we do have something to present to commission, what we'll do is at our next city commission, if it does go forward, we'll ask for permission to advertise, start the notification process. Because then, yes, everybody within the affected area would receive a personal notice, the property owners, personal notice of what this ordinance will be.
Okay.
So,
But right now, we're just in the discussion phase, just hammering it out, right?
well, right now, yes, right now, at the end of the day, today, I'm hoping that you guys would vote to send this over to commission to start that process.
Okay.
Are we ready to move on?
Yep.
Okay. So then, of course, we have purposes which are still listed under that. Starting on page 1, of course, preserve, protect, enhance, foster civic pride, maintain, hopefully improve property values, protect and enhance, draw people, visitors, tourists to the downtown and economic area, mainly prevent urban blight, and also increase our municipal revenues. In addition, whenever you move along to the definitions, which is found on 1734.030, you had, I know under urban nuisance A, it reads right now, any structure, property, building, site, or incidental appurtenance which is not properly maintained. I hope I interpreted your comment right, that maybe just direct them to 1734.130, because that sets, this is what the maintenance requirements are on the building, which we'll get into those here in a few minutes. Towards the end, yes.
Okay, I only wanted to make a observation that, under repair, under 1734-030 definitions, we have all the different types of exteriors, stucco, sheetrock. Would it be appropriate to add glass windows as well, considering we do have structures that have predominantly a glass fascia? To have it say that in addition to, so that we're covering all of our bases. Otherwise, if you were down there by one of those structures near the McCrory building, and that was to be abandoned or whatever, and it had broken glass, we would come back and say, we need to have this improved, and they'd say, well, I read the notice, it says I don't have to, you didn't include glass.
So there is a piece under the maintenance
Yeah,
requirements that
In
discusses.
seven of 1734.130, number 7 covers your windows and doors. How you only have 30 days to repair those.
Yeah, I'd read that, but I just thought, that might be more
And that's-
definitive.
That might be more of a, that's not a window, and it's not a door,
No.
it's glass.
Glass
Yeah.
front.
So it does list or other exterior covering of the building.
Mm-hmm. No, I mean, that just came to my mind. I'm not demanding it, I'm just offering it up for consideration. Just because there is some structures that have glass as far as the front fascia.
Patrick, do you think that or other exterior allows you?
I mean, I
What
think the
do you need to
easiest thing to
defend it?
do is, after rock, put in glass or other exterior
Okay.
covering. That way you got it.
Mm-hmm.
That'll work.
So,
Okay, so, yeah, I had A on that. Of course, we have, basically, any structure, property, building, site, or incidental appurtenance to exist, which because of its condition invites vandalism, graffiti, damage to the building, unlawful entry, affects the overall maintenance, infestations, everything in some detail in section B of that definition. Any other comments or questions on definitions? The next part is permitted uses, and so on the permitted uses, we had municipal-owned parks and playgrounds, government-owned offices, buildings, or facilities, churches. The one thing, and I'll circle back to the multiple dwelling, but we have professional offices, hospitals and clinics, hotels or motels, and retail businesses or facilities that generate GRT for the city. We had a question at our last meeting as far as the minimum square footage, and that actual square footage is listed in our Zone B multiple family dwelling district in our current ordinance. Did a little bit of research because that sounds really small, but even looking at probably one of the most population dense areas in the country, New York City, looking at they classify a micro apartment as something that's at 400 square feet. So when you look at affordable housing standards, these are the recommended minimum square footage. They do state in different areas that you do have to have at least one area that is at least 150 square feet or more within that particular space. So it would be my recommendation that we just put in on the multiple dwellings in this particular area, those minimum square sizes based on the number of bedrooms, or if it's a studio. I'm also thinking realistically at, the type of buildings that we have down in there. We're not gonna be able to fit I don't believe you would be able to fit a 1,600 square foot apartment in any of those structures, existing structures that we have in the downtown area.
Well, what about the old bank building?
I mean, you're looking at a pretty big,
I mean, I guess I was looking at multifamily, if someone wanted to make it, multiple apartments in that building.
I think not remembering what's up there, I think you could very well fit those
Okay.
in that structure. They still have to comply with the minimum housing standards that we have, where you have to have, which we do have that in another section of our code, but you've got to have, restrooms, you've got to have water heater, a place to prepare food, store food, things like that. But it'd be my recommendation to eliminate 300 square foot and just reference these particular sizes, unless you have something else in mind.
Works for me.
Prohibited uses, in 050, of course, we have any of the listed prohibited uses in our zone A, B, or C. Of course, then we have, can't have recreational vehicle or mobile home parks, no single-family dwellings, no mobile homes, trucking or transport companies, truck parking lots, with the exception of something to accommodate a truck parking area, so long as the operator or driver is conducting business at the site of the parking area. So, for instance, we have Allsups. You know, they have the large filling station down there. They could park the truck. They're conducting business there. We also have a restaurant that owns a parking area that could accommodate large truck parking, but it's actually reserved for those customers. We then have any buildings repurposed for storage. And then as far as parking, tractor trailer rigs, freight trailers, buses, hazardous cargo vehicles, or anything more than 15,000 pounds. This basically copies what our off-street parking ordinance and on-street and residential areas. But you can park delivery vehicles that are utilized for that business, because if you think about it, you know, we have a General Welding downtown. We also have, I don't know what that vehicle weighs, but Aaron's, they have an appliance delivery vehicle. Then also customer vehicles being stored. For instance, if we have a mechanic shop that is on that area, they can actually store them there, and then you can park vehicles for loading and unloading, obviously. And these were actually based on complaints we received from the public and commission as far as what is wrong with our downtown areas.
And any of the ones that are existing now are still going to be grandfathered in until they sell.
Yes, sir.
If
It's a
mechanic-
start in the right direction. I
If it's
guess
a
you could say.
mechanic
Right,
shop and
yeah.
it sells, it would still be able to be, because you're about to have a mechanic shop in that area, right?
Mhm. And it generates sales tax.
So, devil's advocate, going back to the purpose, item D, our description is bounded, like Avenue D, beginning at 17th Commercial, bounded by the north by the southern portion of Avenue C, and bounded to the south by the northern portion of Avenue A.
E.
Or,
Yes.
sorry.
Now,
And so,
change that to an alley.
well, no, actually, I still like your definition. I really do like your definition. So, I think it carries that, but here's the thing. Define bounded by.
Within.
So, is that the property line, or is that the curb, or what's the southern portion from the
Well,
center
if you
line of the
look,
road?
because we do have areas that don't have a roadway through it, especially whenever you get on the east side of Love Street, for instance, on the south side. So we just basically put that properties that don't have an Avenue C or Avenue E built or platted, the boundary will be assumed as a number of feet from the public right-of-way in which the roadway will exist if platted and built.
The reason why I asked the question is if I decide to park on the north side of the park, my semi-trailer on the north side of the park over there,
Can't.
it's on the curb line and not on the property line. And when I read this, bounded by is the property line.
No, you can't. In that particular instance, we already have a code that prohibits that. Actually, no, because that particular portion of Avenue C over there on Avenue D Park, that the south side of Avenue C all the way down is zone commercial. And so that's actually allowed because it is a commercial zone. But the reason I'm saying alley is you also look at the character makeup of Avenue D. If we use the, basically from, you know, Avenue E and then also Avenue C, it basically is all residential all the way down to Avenue D. So that's housing, and I'm recommending that we just do the alleyway because we already have a housing shortage, and I don't want somebody to have to sell their home and say, well, I can't sell it now because it can only be used as a business.
Okay.
You're gonna have that with people on Avenue D anyways, right?
Well, like we said, there's about a dozen homes
Right.
there right now, and
I mean, they're,
Well, and then there's a couple of them that face the other streets, part of it's on D.
So at the end of the day, the question really rotated around bounded by,
right.
not the specific situation or the alley or anything like that. If they park on the curb line, is that acceptable, or are we basing it to the property line?
Well, if it's the alley, I would say the full width of the alley. So if it's on Avenue E, it would be the northern edge of the alley between Avenue D and Avenue C. So basically up to the,
We're gonna change all these definitions from the road to the north, to the south, to the east, to the west, to the alleyway,
correct,
including the alleyway.
correct. So the whole alley.
And there are alleys in all of those instances.
With the exception of, there is a stretch between
Yeah.
7th and 4th. There's a prescribed easement there. There's
Oh,
a
yeah.
sewer line there.
Them
And
alleys
then
is every
actually
couple of
on Avenue, actually on the south side of that, from basically Mr. W's Fireworks all the way to commercial, there is not an alley. So
There's none on North Love either, north of, right there, Town and Country, Jefferson.
There actually is an alley there.
there
It's
is,
just been encroached and
right, and that's
we're
being
working
addressed.
on that.
What about north of Polk? 'Cause there's no alley between my business and
That's part, there is an alley.
Yes, there is.
really?
Yes.
You use it.
Crystal, get on that. I think we have an, there's, I believe there is. We'll look at that later. But, and in that particular case, as long as he feels that it's defensible, could we use that same definition that if there were an actual alley there, or should we actually use a measurement? So many
Well, someone's
feet.
gonna say there's not an alley, so where do you draw that line? I mean, I think if we were in a courtroom, we'd say to the judge, well, you know, the alleys are in a little bit different locations, and this is the purpose of this. You know, there's not an alley here, but that doesn't mean it goes on to infinity.
Right.
So, you know, are they gonna be, I don't know how it's gonna happen. I mean, we could go and identify each one of those locations, but if there's one location that doesn't have an alley that we leave off, then we'll still have that same problem. And so a lot of times when you formulate an ordinance or a statute, let's say, if you could put some general terms in there that at least gives the judge some direction about what the intent of that was, it's sometimes more helpful than if you come up with a specific list. Because if you leave something off that list, it's clear to that judge, he or she, that you didn't intend to include that in. And so it's difficult. So if we take a
So
look
with
at
that, I mean, so it would be assumed. If
yeah,
there
it's the
were-
number of feet from the public right of way in which the roadway would exist if it were platted as such. So, I mean, we can work with that. There's not ever gonna be, in a situation that we have in Lovington with, you know, rock solid, absolute, you know, gonna make it stick. There are gonna be some exceptions out there, and we'll just have to deal with them. And I think that's based on how things were platted, how, you know, what we did as far as enforcement, and a number of other things that piled into it, so. And then you gotta look at what are the chances that one spot is gonna be the problem area for us, you know, if they're parking in the alley or not. How does that really have an effect on the whole, you know, purpose of the statute.
So are you better off using feet on all of them instead of using alleyway, and some don't have an alleyway?
Well, if we did feet and an alley was a different distance, we'd have to go measure all those.
Okay, you have to
alleys.
measure them all.
And so there's more of a risk of a problem with alleys not being a certain feet from the roadway than a couple of these smaller spots. So I'd rather roll the dice on a couple of these smaller spots than all these alleys and measure those out in feet, so.
I guess, do you want me to move on, or
Yeah.
anything else?
Well,
Okay. No, I mean, that's what we're here for, it's good. All right, so then we also have, I'm sorry, parking regulations. I know that you had handicapped accessibility, so basically, if it's new commercial construction, our current ordinance requires that you provide one space for every 800 square feet of building, and that's for new. We then have, 2 or more establishments. If they share it, you got to share a parking lot, got to be within 300 feet. But we also need to add in there that new construction, you have to comply with ADA standards.
Yeah.
And instead of saying, well, it's so many spaces, they can actually look it up in ADA. I don't want to get into that, but thank you for bringing that up.
Can I ask a real quick question about the 300 feet?
Uh-huh.
I mean, it's just ignorance on my part. I don't know what that means as far as 300 feet.
So you have 2 businesses, let's say for instance, okay, you have a business here, you have a business here, there's a blank spot right here that they both want to use as a parking lot, and they have permission to. So that property, they can actually share spaces as long as their business is within 300 feet of that particular parking lot. So even if they're across the street, basically if they're within 1 block of that parking lot and they have something that said, this is for new construction, but they have an agreement in place that says, yes, you can use this for parking for your business, it would be allowable as long as it's within 300, or a block roughly. A block here, and especially in our downtown
So
areas, anywhere
it
from
doesn't
3
have to be
300.
right there at the premises.
Correct.
It could be, okay.
Yes.
All right. Thank you.
okay.
Of course, height and setbacks. We took a lot of these setbacks from our commercial zone, mainly because of our existing uses. And I know so if you look at the front yard, side yard, rear yard, and interior courts, those definitions came from Zone C, our commercial, which that's actually what this particular area is currently zoned as. Yes, in Zone C, there is 0 lot lines unless it abuts a residential area, which in this particular case, it doesn't. It is commercial all the way through. However, in the future, if somebody were to say, hey, over here on First Street between Adams and Washington, we want to rezone this for Zone B because we want to put in multiple family, that's a residential district. Somebody comes along and says, well, hey, we want to build a new building here, they would have to conform to that to make sure that their setbacks conform to the definitions set within that particular area.
The only reason I put 0 lot line there is because something like what you were defining for the front yard, so
Right.
it's easier to write 0 lot line.
Yes, yeah, but it was easier to take this out of, cut and paste it out of Zone C.
So the other thing is, the one that I have says 7 stories.
It
70
is.
feet, not
That's a
5.
typo,
Okay.
yes,
All right, good.
it is 70 feet, so. Intensity of use, of course, this is only going to apply to the living facilities. And the definition, this of course comes out of Zone C. But this only applies to somebody who wants to, I guess, go in and remodel a building and use it for an apartment. And I know that it says it provides an area of not less than 1,000 square feet per family. You had made the remark it needs further definition. I agree, because where is that extra, even if they do a 3-bedroom, and based on those recommendations that we had with, I think it was 750 square feet, where's the extra footage come from? Does that include parking?
950 for a 3-bedroom.
What should we do? I don't know.
So,
Do you think it should? I mean,
my specific
I think-
question
yeah.
relates to the issue that we have at the, Health and Wellness Center. How big's a family? 1,000 square feet, how big's a family? That, I'm not trying to be rude, I'm just hitting the nail on the current issue.
Correct, and I don't think that it's our body, or it's our responsibility of a government to set what a family size is.
I agree that it's not, but then that means that we could probably come up with a different way to define it.
I think the intent behind this basically is just to assure a minimum amount of square feet. Even in the minimum housing standards, there is not a definition on number of people. It just says that for this particular site, you have to assure so many square feet.
Well, one of the things we could do is just reference that maybe, and then if that ever changes or morphs or, if there's a different definition, kind of like with ADA. Because you could look at it, I guess, and say, well, it was one person a family. No. So is there different requirements for that one person? I don't know.
So maybe just intensity of use regulations shall apply to living facilities or above stores or other commercial uses and meet minimum housing standards as
Minimum square footage requirements as set by the
by HUD, maybe.
Yeah, I
You
don't
wish
know
you
what
could
the
just
right
say,
thing to do is, but.
use common sense. And then
Yeah.
you probably wouldn't have to have this.
Yeah,
Not a lot of people
Because
use
I know I
it.
have
There's
problems
a-
with that.
there's a whole
1,000
library of
square
CF,
foot.
yeah, there's a whole library of CFRs in Washington DC based on the fact that people didn't use common sense.
Right, I know, I'm just saying,
So
it's hard to cover every single,
maybe we ought to take it out since we've already addressed minimum square footage on,
Well, we did, because we
Residences.
said, we said the square footage here.
just omit it.
I don't have a problem with that because that's in the commercial zone thing. And someone wanted to put in a living unit in their structure, but they only had 700 and something square foot to have this living unit placed within their business to still run their business. So Laura, at the time, because it was when I first started, she said no, because the intensity of uses, they have to have 1,000 square foot.
Well, with the table that we're talking about inserting,
Yeah, that's why I don't like
on-
this intensity use. I don't like it in the other way.
yeah, we're talking about inserting a table on 1734.040, item D. That would resolve that.
That would resolve that, that's what I'm saying.
So
I don't
just
like
remove
this.
intensity of use?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm fine with that.
I-
Scratch.
Okay.
And you have other mechanisms in here for
Right.
inspections and stuff like that to ensure that we have proper facilities inside a living unit to cover the number of people that are living there. So,
Just for clarification on my part, are we talking about it would be possible to have a business and then have a residence in the back of it? Say like if you owned a barber shop and then you lived in the back of it? Is that, because that's what
Wait,
Crystal was
that's
just mentioning, right?
So, okay, this is one thing that, if you really think about, if you read the intensity of use, it says above.
yes.
Yes, that's it.
So
There's not a lot of above.
perhaps there needs to be because we do have that going on where there's stores and people put a residence in the back.
Yeah, because store buildings are so big.
Is
Maybe
that,
if you said with.
as long as it's an operating, okay, so it has to have a business, but if they're operating a business out of it and they decide to live there, is there any harm with that? as long as they're actually operating a legit business.
Yeah.
I don't think there's harm in it, but I think that goes against what the ordinance reads, because the way I read the ordinance was what you said with respect to above. It's intended that the bottom floor be a commercial facility or a retail facility, and if there's residents involved with that becomes the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh floor.
Yeah, because we're doing away with the residents.
But what if it's only a single floor structure? Then no residents.
Well, the ordinance allows multiple family dwelling. So if you had a store and somebody was living in the back, would that be considered, this is a question, but would that be considered a single family dwelling? Because there's only one living space there. You have to have more than one. So by definition, you couldn't have that single unit in the back of the store. So I guess we circle back again to getting rid of intensity of use.
But if you had a residence above the store, is that still not a single residence?
You'd still have to have more than one.
Yeah.
Oh, so any kind of living space would require more than one.
Correct.
I think ultimately that's going to be a sticking point as we go through this whole process, and it's going to be something that's going to have to be ironed out, but it's going to come from the public and from the commission as well, with respect to how they want to look at that from the directive. I mean, the intent of this is the way, at least the way I read it, besides all the purposes written, is that we create a commercial, or we create a revenue generating storefront, and hopefully start creating an urban development that allows for housing above it, which in the long-term vision of that would be new structures or adopting old structures in such a way that there's housing above it.
But wouldn't it encourage people to invest in a structure and in a business if they didn't have to maintain a household separate from it? Because having lived in the older parts of Pittsburgh and other parts, a lot of people have traditionally lived behind their business. Butchers, bakers, candlestick makers, you know, all that sort of thing. And there's a part of me that would be inclined to say a living residence for the owner operator of the business would be allowed as long as it didn't exceed a certain percentage. You know, 2/3 would be dedicated towards business, 1/3 towards a living structure. In that way, maybe that would be a way of promoting a person to move in, you know, because in what I'm seeing, like if you go to Deep Ellum or, you know, in Dallas, or you go to Portland in Oregon and places like that, you see these young urban entrepreneurs, and they're coming in, but they're living in the space where they're working, whether it's IT or making glass or whatever it is that they're doing. And so I'm just throwing that out there for consideration.
But what happens if their business goes under, then you're gonna kick them out of their house?
Sure.
So that's what they're gonna be like.
We're gonna kick people out of their house now because they can't, we're gonna zone it economic, you know, hey,
Right.
you've been living there for 50 years, you can't sell it. Okay,
I agree.
back to enforcement.
I think you bring up a valid point. I think that the only way we get to a good answer on that is to go through the process and make adjustments as we go, based on public comment, based on what our commission feels and sees as well, and what our attorneys think that can be defended. Yeah. And that's a shot in the dark with today's society. So you know, you never know what the decision's going to be at the end of the day. So I mean, we can try and hash it out here, or we can note the comments and we can present those comments to the commission when we send it to them. What do you think the best approach is, Patrick?
I think probably taking comments from the public just to see, you know, that adds to, my ability to defend some that went out to that particular person and they were concerned about it. One of the first things they would do is come to the meeting and voice their concern, and so, you know, that helps me in the long run.
So are you good with that?
I'm good. I'm just throwing it out. I just want to consider it.
Okay.
Yeah, because this isn't something we're gonna hammer out in a day.
Yeah. Just 2
2 days.
2 very long days.
So what's next, Tim?
Maintenance requirements, really haven't changed any of these. I didn't receive any other comments. Of course, this is just making sure that folks take care of it. And it does come down to an enforcement issue, but you drive through the community and there's a lot of buildings right now that this would allow us to create those, or provide the incentive for those owners to actually take care of them. It would increase the visibility of the downtown area in a positive manner. But if you look at item 3, you know, it talks about just making sure that there's not any junk, you know, weeds, junk, trash, examples of what needs to be removed. We can have murals, since that is a kind of an initiative, an approved mural. You know, somebody just couldn't go down there and tag a building and say it's a mural. You know, and this also gives us the opportunity to, for, you know, the city for many years, a lot of people tend to forget this, is that, you know, the city does offer, you know, graffiti removal. We'll just go down there and remove it with our stuff. You have to sign a release, but it won't restore the finish to original, but at least it will get anything off the building. If you have landscaping, you have to maintain it. Our window and door requirements are covered in items 6 and 7. Got to make sure that you have windows that are, well, more than just functional. They're not disfigured, cracked. They are weather tight. Really, in the case that you have a boarded up window or door, the plywood or other covering has to fit precisely. It needs to be painted a dark ashen gray or black to simulate a typical exterior window. Let's see, utilizing boards or other materials such as metal to secure broken windows or doors can only be used for 30 days, after which time you have to repair it. Moving on to the next, structure shall not have an awning with more than 30% of the surface area torn, tattered, or missing for more than 30 days. Structural damage not permitted for more than 60 days. You must maintain the roof. And item 11 is pretty broad. And this was taken from, I believe it was the Village of Raton, New Mexico code. We then, of course, have security requirements as well. You got to make sure that nobody can get into it. As far as securing it, close, lock windows, doors, gates, and other openings, to make sure that, you know, a child can't gain access to the interior. Broken windows and other openings secured until permanent repairs are accomplished. If it's owned by somebody who is out of the area, you have to have a local property management company or person to perform monthly inspections. Upon request of the city, the property company shall provide inspection reports. So basically, this gives us the ability for somebody who lives in Arizona who owns some commercial property down here that's vacant. We actually have a point of contact, and we can make sure that somebody's actually going by and checking those buildings. And also, you know, if they should be going inside, make sure that we don't have some type of a lake forming in a downtown building, since we don't have the ability to get access to it. Let's see. Moving along to abatements and notices, this gives us very similar, because we're really dealing with, at this point, a health and a safety issue, to give us the ability to abate that hazard. Instead of condemning it, this is basically the same process we do for you know, an overabundance of weeds. We actually have the ability to go in, abate that, which essentially we provide notice to the person, you need to take care of this. They have a 10-day period to remedy that, and after that 10-day period, we actually can go in and provide notice. Of course, the location, all of that description, we serve them. If they don't take care of it, then we can go in, we absorb those costs, we turn around, we file a lien on that property for the cost of the abatement. Of course, penalties, this would go through the municipal court process. So there is a penalty where they could be fined up to $500 for that. Of course, that fine is set by the municipal judge, and it's a fine that would be for each day that the violation occurs. So that is this in a nutshell. Sure.
So when you say $500, it's up to a $500 max, or Monday you haven't done it, so that's a $500 fine. Tuesday you haven't done it, so that's another $500 fine. Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, yeah.
For rolling fine out of the.
But that is at the discretion of the judge.
I understand. I just
Right.
making
But
sure
yes,
I
no,
understand.
it's per day the violation occurs.
Mhm.
Any other questions for staff?
I'm gonna be the bad person. I own property on Avenue D.
Okay.
What is this going to help my property?
How is it going to help?
I'm not the only one that's gonna ask me this.
We're preventing a mobile home from moving in right next door to it.
Right. A mobile home or
There
an
ain't
RV
no one coming
park,
up to put that next to my building,
but there's nothing right now that says.
There's
it can't.
nothing right now that prevents that.
Oh.
I'm gonna buy that mobile home park.
you ain't gonna buy it by running track.
You know, it would prevent stuff like that. And then let's say that, for instance, somebody goes in and they put up a building next door to you, and for some reason they use like really watered down, water-based paint. They close up shop and the building goes into disrepair and it's vacant. Now, this helps address the complaints that in this hypothetical situation, you would make that building next door looks like garbage, it needs to be cleaned up.
Yeah.
The windows are broken, the paint's peeling. Right now, there's nothing we can do, because a lot of folks, well, that's affecting my property values, it's also affecting my ability to attract business to my location. So that is one of the benefits, is to avoid those problems, because we get a lot of complaints in this area that, well, this looks horrible, why don't you do something about it? And the honest truth
But the
is,
properties are gonna stay
there's-
commercial, right?
I'm sorry, excuse me.
It'll all stay commercial property. This would just be another zone after.
This would be a zone. It's much like commercial, but it actually incorporates the appearance standards for the economic or
Like some
retail
of these
district that we have.
nasty things that's left up closed, okay? I'm just
But
trying, I'm
that's,
trying to tell you, this is
oh no,
what's
that,
going
that,
to
this is exactly how it will help, because it's very, from a staff perspective, it's very, it's bad, it's sad whenever we have somebody who has valid complaints, but we honestly do not have a means to do any type of enforcement. And believe it or not, that excuse does not satisfy a customer. So, you know, and that's the thing, is they make the complaint, we tell them that, and they say, we'll do something to fix it. And so this is one way that we can address that. But at the same time, this helps the city by, one, making sure that our areas that, I guess you could say it's our retail zone.
It's hard. Yeah, everybody did watch it.
All right,
She timed it to do that.
yes, that was perfect. But also this helps the city out because it preserves our area where we get our gross receipts tax from. And at the same time, whenever we generate more gross receipts tax, we can fix things. We can not only fix and abate properties, help enforce these, but it has other effects. You know, that's how we fix things in town. The more gross receipts tax we can do, the more we can fix, the more we can build, so.
I think the other thing too is it prevents, somebody from putting some residential structures next to you and then having them come in and complain that, you know, on the 4th of July, you're
John
overlate.
making way too much noise.
Yeah, exactly. And
Yeah.
you can't sleep, you know, the light's on, you got traffic in and out all the time, and you're gonna say, hey, this is a business zone. So I think that helps also, is at least, you know, sets the stage as far as making an attempt not to have these residential structures where you have that kind of conflict of use.
Worst case scenario, you take John Wayne Airport in Southern California. When it was built, 5-7 miles was the nearest residence to it. And the residents, all the subdivisions kept coming closer and closer and surrounded it. And then they got John Wayne Airport to where you can't fly in before 7 and out after 7 now.
We're not building an airport, folks,
No.
that's all I can say.
But that's what happens.
Ours has been really
Yeah.
busy.
It's not protected.
But this also, I mean, this really isn't a sudden thought. I mean, we've been working on this.
I know, but I'm just trying to be devilized, what you're gonna ask.
No, well,
Yeah,
we've been
wow,
working on this
commercial
for
property.
over 6 months, but also it's identified in our comprehensive plan
Oh,
that
I
this
knew it was
is
in the master
the
plan.
direction that the city wants to go. And I don't see that vision changing within the next time that we revise that plan. Or update it, I'm sorry.
Any other comments?
I want to go back to the houses again. And we were talking about, you know, people that have built mobile, you know, manufactured homes and placed them in commercial zones. But what about those individuals that built their homes on Avenue D before it was probably even zoned commercial? How does, this is going to affect them the same way, but when those were built and when those were sold to those individuals that have them now, you know, like if you go all the way to 17th Street, you got the house across from the Lovington Inn, I know that one, and then
That's not in city limits?
Yeah, it's in the county.
but he said all, the economic zone go all the way to 17th Street.
Yeah, they.
But not in that area, that is not city property.
Yeah, that's actually, I'd see where you're getting at. So a situation like that. Bad example, but good analogy, I guess.
Okay, how about
yeah.
the Rock House? That's
Sure,
down there
sure.
where they
So,
sell fireworks.
You know, no, that's difficult, you know, that it won't affect the current tenants. However, people, they'll be notified, they'll have the ability to come in and talk to the city commission and try to, you know, use the process that we have to sway their decision. I guess to put it plain and simply, we won't be able to please everybody. It is going to affect the minority of folks, but the majority of businesses that are in there. So it's
But
a
that used to
small
be a
segment.
business.
Yes, it's bad. They'll still be able to live there. Now, whenever when ownership changes, that's something that they will have to deal with.
Yeah, that was a business, remember, it used to be a upholstery shop.
Used to be a
So
what?
An upholstery shop,
it's
The,
granted.
the where they sell the fireworks out of now?
where they sell them on the garage. That garage was the upholstery shop. And they lived in the house. Just like the Noax boot store next to my store,
Mhm.
their house is right beside the boot store that was there.
So it doesn't, you know, I think I'm just thinking here. It's easier to convert one of those homes into a business than it is to convert one of these businesses into a home.
Mhm.
So it's not totally eliminating the value of their property, it's just expanding it for a different use.
But the back of my store was a home.
Well, now we wanna know if it still is, because now we wanna evict you, maybe put it on the second floor.
It's a Hummer, a Volkswagen.
Or a Volkswagen?
It's got a Volkswagen back there.
Any other,
Also, this has a Volkswagen.
any other comments, questions, concerns? If not, I'll take a motion.
So we didn't make a motion to send us a revised.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
You can say it.
You guys need to understand, if this dies for lack of motion, it automatically goes to commission.
But it needs to go to the commission with a revised copy, doesn't it?
We're gonna get these
revisions
It would be better
Mm-hmm.
that it came from here, but you are right. I mean, we received direction from commission to come up with this. So yes, it would still go to the city commission.
I second the motion.
I don't know that we actually.
Seems how we don't actually,
Kidding. I thought you was making a motion.
seeing as how we
Making a motion to put it through with the revised.
seeing as how we don't actually have Robert's rules ordinance here, so a requirement here, I make a motion that we approve the recommendation with the adjusted, with the recommendations made today to continue on to this commission.
I'll second that.
You second.
I was waiting for those two to quit.
No, I,
Back and
I
forth.
yeah, I guess
Patrick sitting there going, I think we're okay here.
Yeah, we're good,
So, any other comments, questions, concerns? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Hearing none opposing, passes. Now you can make your adjournment.
So this goes to the commission, and then from there you ask to
Probably come
advertise
back
it.
to us.
Yes, sir.
It'll probably be
So,
back to us.
right, we'll present this to the city commission, on the 25th of this month. And if they like this, they would have the opportunity at that point for us to begin the advertisement process. And part of that advertisement, other than just posting the ordinance and having a copy of it available down here, we'll also begin the process of mailing this out to everyone within the affected area.
And
And
inviting
basically
them to-
everyone within 100 feet of the affected area as well, because this is not only is it, that's actually a question, do we need to send this out to everybody in Zone C or just the ones in the affected area?
I need to look at that.
Okay, because I thought of that today. So, because it's not only, it's a change in zoning code,
But it only affects a
but
certain.
it only
portion.
affects a certain area. But anytime we basically change zoning as well, you also notify everybody who owns property within 100 feet of the proposed zoning change. So it may be safer just to notify everybody in Zone C.
Yeah. And that would be development.
Okay.
And then they would get a chance to come back to the
They would.
following months.
Well, I think because this is a big change, what we would do is we would just take public comment probably during the month of April, and then just schedule a vote for May. That way, everybody would have at least 2 public meetings to show up,
Right.
make comment, and then actually give them 3 opportunities to make public comment
Right.
about it. Just to be on the safe side.
Take a motion to adjourn.
Now I'll make the motion to adjourn.
Okay.
I'll second.
I have a motion and a